instead of mathematical models, you have an individual to do that model. In-depth survey is slightly different from a large-scale survey. Now, I'm not going to do hundreds of questionnaires. I'm going to use mostly interviews. I'm still surveying, but I'm using fairly structured or unstructured interview. I have a smaller amount of people that I interview. I can't go around hundreds. I've got to record that, and then I've got to get the transcripts and the things to analyze. It's more in-depth survey. It's not a large-scale survey. See, we're moving down from the positivist. Action research is a very popular environment. What happens in action research is that you have both the opportunity to affect the outcome and do the research. Now, this is quite difficult to do action research because your ethical clearance might be an issue. How are you going to go around and experiment based on your theoretical perspective and record it? And your opportunity to do in that management tends to be pretty limited, but if you have that opportunity, it's incredibly rewarding because you actually see your work and you can evaluate whether that works. But there's ethical issues whether you have access. You would intervene, and then there is reflective loops, very serious reflection loops. Participant observer, you are studying something, and being part of what you're studying is very important. This is how you collect your evidence. Once again, this could be a research design in itself, or it could be an evidence collecting mechanism, one set of evidence. Participatory action research is very similar to action research. But it's not only you that decide what you're going to do. There's more than one party in your process. If you do, and we'll go to that northern style research, it would be, I am the researcher, there's somebody else that's my co-researcher, but they would be, say, the management of that organization, and I go and I do action research, but it's not only my things that are being done, it's somebody else also has a direct input. Therefore, I have much less control over what's happening. Now, participatory action research is really, really important. There's some serious issues that you've got to do, and participation has to occur at all levels. Okay? If you go through that, there is a southern tradition around participatory action research that really talks to the emancipatory paradigm. That basically say that I'm working with poor or oppressed groups or excluded groups, and I am doing my research with them to come up with something that addresses all problems. It's explicitly committed to social equity, self-determination, and all of those kind of things. And fundamentally, at the next point, your operationalization of how you jointly inquire and looking at it and changing the things as you do your research becomes a bit of an issue. Because you need to get some representative of the community. You don't want to sit as a researcher there. From two perspectives, you don't want to sit there with 15 people shouting at you, and neither can you say that you've done full participatory inquiry because I really know I control the situation. So your levels of joint inquiry becomes the issue. If you go to the northern tradition, it's not explicitly committed to something, but it basically deals with it from a management perspective. And most of the participatory action research that you would possibly be involved with in a management faculty would be dealing with that operational problem-solving approach. It becomes very, very difficult to make sure, once again, there's a possibility in here that you could be doing a consulting job. So if you've got to phrase it very carefully. You work with your constituencies, and you include your operational readers. You're not the one making the decision, but you include the decision leaders. And your inquiry is possibly driven, mostly driven by the structures. You deal with the people that make the decisions. They are the guys that you participate with. They are the people that also participate on making the decision through the research. Evaluation study, once again, an area that could be quite contested. You can do evaluations that are simply one-dimensional, or you can do an intense evaluation research process. Now, when you do evaluation research, you have to look at multiple angles in the whole thing. You're not just looking what, and you might be looking at it, I just want to see if it's working or not. You might be looking at it to say, I want to make it work better next time around. Or you might be looking at it to say, I want to generate knowledge. Now, the moment you do this kind of thing for a master's or a doctorate, and specifically for a doctorate, you better be generating knowledge, or you're just doing a consulting job. So whenever you do this kind of thing, you've got to be very, very careful about how you articulate what it is that you're evaluating to make sure that you don't fall into the so what consulting. Now, you might be evaluating a number of things. You would certainly be evaluating the need, because there could be different needs. People did this whole social intervention because they thought this was a need, but they didn't really look at the need. Okay? You might be looking at the process of how you've implemented the social intervention, because mostly you're evaluating social interventions. You might be looking at the outcomes of those. You might be looking at the efficiency of that intervention. And you might be looking at the underlying theoretical assumptions. What I mean there, possibly your whole process of dealing with changing or implementing information around HIV with the intent to change the behavior patterns. It's very important there. People had a theoretical assumption that if somebody knows, they would be willing to make decisions. Is this good enough? And it's actually very interesting at the moment that the results are showing at the moment that although this was quite successful, the instances of infection is increasing again. So what would be the new theoretical, what would they be going on from now to carry on? Futures research? Futures research is really not looking at the past. You're now looking forward. So obviously you don't have quantitative data that you can look at because you're really looking at what people think forward. Very qualitative, and you're trying to combine people's view of what is happening in the forward. It's predictions. Now, futures research and scenario research is not the same thing. Futures research is what's going to happen forward, and scenarios research, I'll get to that now, is slightly different. Focus group, is a focus group a research design, or is it a collection technique? And it could be both. People could be a focus group study that they just within a specific focus group do a lot of things that they're inquiring. And typically when you pull together a focus group, whether you're looking at it as a data collection or you're looking at the research design, the people that you put into that focus group is very important. In a focus group, you are not looking at individuals' opinions, you're putting them in a specific situation, and the way that they reach conclusions, the actual discourse that they engage in is incredibly important. Not only what is said, but how is it said, how are people forming. It could be fairly expensive if you want to put focus groups together. So obviously you've got to bring 20 people in together. Are you going to deal with the transport? Are you going to arrange the places you're going to meet? Are you going to feed them? Can you yourself facilitate that meeting? Because you've got to facilitate this discussion, and some people don't have those skills. Or do you need to bring in a facilitator? It could become very, very costly, whether you data collection or research design. It has incredible advantages, but it has some weaknesses that you have to deal with. Case study, and this is now case study research. Whether you can, as I said, do it fully quantitative, you can do it fully qualitative, but typically case study research look at the need to understand complex phenomena in a real life situation. You can use it in theory generation, you use it in unique situations. You've got to select your case, either single case or multiple case. You've got to know what you're studying, you're defining your thing. It's suited to mixed methodology because you're using multiple sources of evidence, and it allows and it requires actually several ways of data collection. Typically you're getting data through interviews, you're getting them through, you can do full-scale surveys in a case study, etc. Ethnography. Ethnography is a very interesting research. Now, when you do ethnographic research, it sounds pretty easy. I'm going to become part of them. I have an epic perspective on it, and I'm checking out what's happening here. But full-level ethnographic research is very, very tedious because there are very fundamental cycles of reflection that you go through of the ever-deepening understanding. Typically, you look at socially constructed meaning. You want to understand how people. Now, this becomes really, really on the far side, away from positivists. You're really looking at it, and you actually have to look at that. But there's some disputing, and it is fairly complex. And it is very complex, in fact, and people sometimes look at it very superficially, and it tends to take a long time. So ethnographic types of research, if you don't have to go that way, be very careful. Scenario research. This is now once again similar to role playing. You're trying to see what happens in specific scenarios. You have the futures, but then you want to see what is going to happen under those circumstances. Okay. There is a form of mapping between your research approach and the way that you look at it, whether positive or interpretivist. Lab experiment is a strictly positivist thing. Field experiment could be positivist or interpretivist. Participant observation is strictly interpretivist. If you start looking large-scale survey, you're talking about a positivist. If you're talking in depth, it's mostly interpretivist. So when you go through that and you tell me the paradigm that you're going through, and I can understand your reasons and your possible motivations for the research, because your motivations reflect your paradigm and the reasons you want to be doing this. And this is not congruent with the way that you're going to start executing it. So you claim that you really want to explain, understand what's happening, but you're going to use a large-scale survey. And look at you were doing what? Because it's not congruent. It's not aligned. Case study could be either way. Game or role-playing is interpretivist. Focus groups are mostly interpretivist. Scenario research is mostly interpretivist. Action research is strictly interpretivist. Ethnography is strictly interpretivist. Futures research scope for either, what is going to happen in there, and simulation is strictly positive with some interpretation. When you start choosing this tactic, be very careful. Choose one that suits you and answer your question. If what you come out with doesn't suit you as a person, change your question until it's possible for you to answer it. Research is the art of the possible. It is not about trying to prove something. Do something that works for you. Make sure that your strategy and your tactics align. You may want to use triangulation, that you put evidence together. You've got to avoid contradictions. You must ensure that it's doable. And very importantly, your supervisor has to agree. Otherwise, you're really just wasting your time. The next here is around your operational choices. Your operational choices is around what techniques and procedures and you're going to use for data collection and analysis. Now, there's a number of data collection types. Observations. Observations has different options. This is slightly different from the evidence. Remember, this is how you're going to collect it, the evidence, whatever the evidence is. And it has advantages and it has disadvantages. you have interviews. There are a variety of interviews. And in fact, a group interview and a focus group can also be seen as a form of interview. But what you're getting from a focus group is not a group interview. I don't have 5 people here or 20 people here and I'm interviewing them. I have one-on-one relationships with them. I am looking at the interaction of the group as well. I can do it face-to-face, I can do it over the telephone. In fact, my dearly beloved son did some interviews for his alleged research for his matric project by WhatsApp. In fact, it's quite interesting. WhatsApp interviews have the benefit of being recorded. After I looked at him, I saw some of our honors research guys also doing it, and you can print out your WhatsApp interview. No concern about trying to go around and get somebody to type it up. There's a variety of things. So there's email interviews as well. People sometimes, and very often in some cases, people do email interviews. They have a set of email conversations. Documents. Are you going to collect documents? What kind of documents? The benefit of our documents is obviously you don't have to get somebody to type them. They're already written, and it can be very expensive. In fact, 1 hour interview equates to at least 6 hours of coding to get it ready to be analyzed. So doing a number of hours of interviews, you really have to deal with how you're going to look at that. Disadvantage is very often that people are not always articulate. Now, if anybody that's seen my emails tend to be either long, well-crafted sentences, and I spent ages getting them exactly right, or it ends up with bullet, bullet, bullet. Do this, come there, do action words. Basically, it doesn't even, it's not even a single sentence, it's single words. Now, if you're trying to look at documents and you're looking at those 2 documents, both of them made by me, you're going to analyze them differently. They're going to say something differently. So you may not actually get all the evidence, but it's unobtrusive and you can get them after the fact. So it's, when you start dealing with documents, it's very important. And a lot of evaluation studies, you're looking at documents. Audiovisual. Okay, the first thing about audiovisual evidence, make sure that your equipment works. Now you can do audiovisual, you can go into interviews, you need to get permission to record people audiovisually in most cases. When you are doing unobtrusive recordings, for example, you want to be looking, one of the students that I work with wants to actually be able to measure people's responses to forms of Indian art. Okay? So she's going to have little cameras behind the artworks to observe responses. What would indicate emotional response? Would a person move back? How do they react? She wants to analyze that. So obviously she's not going to go around getting people to sign permission, because then people are going to act differently. But she's going to measure that in a public space, there's all kinds of ethical procedures that she's going through. The moment that you've got audio-visual kind of messages, you've got to have permission to do that. You've got to make damn sure your equipment works. There's nothing worse than doing a 1 hour or say a 2 hour really deep, intense, incredibly important interview and then find out, damn, didn't record. Okay, so, okay. Yeah, I'm doing this interview and I'm recording. Okay.
He's done it with no audio before.
Oh, with me?
No, with me.
Oh, gosh. Okay, once again, the same kind of thing around this tactic. Don't try and be fancy. All of those things, you've dealt with them. So in your research design, you must specify. Now this is going to you go through these layers, but then you've got to actually in the detail specify your research protocol, how you're going to go about that. What's your ethical things? You've got to specify your population. And in very many mixed design, the population that you deal with and the sampling or selection protocol is different for each part of your data collection. If you start looking at your population that you are going to do, say, in-depth survey and large-scale survey, the same population, but for a large-scale survey, you are going to do random selection. In an in-depth survey, you're going to follow another kind of selection process. Okay. You've got to specify how you're going to collect, you've got to specify your instruments. Now in your case, with the 12-page, you're probably not going to have your detailed instrument design, but you have to give a very, very good idea of what that instrument will be about. You've got to deal with how you're going to capture it and how you're going to analyze it.
So the capturing and analyzing goes in the proposal?
It has to be. You can't skip that one. I want to know, and we'll get to that action, I don't want to know I'm going to use SPSS. I want to know, are you going to do factor analysis?
But those 12 pages at the end, those bits and pieces of the chapters outline, the
next point at 5 o'clock, in fact at about 5:30 we'll go there. Okay. There's a lot of, in qualitative research, this depends on how far down the paradigm you're going. So if you do qualitative research, you can go around it and you can seriously consider, and you can do a fairly positivist approach or a quasi-positivist approach about how you're going to go into your qualitative work. You pre-design your instruments, you actually have your analysis, or you can go for a very, very, very interpretivist, phenomenological perspective that you basically don't even specify your research design. It's let's see as we go. So it really, there's a number of decisions. And if you're going to do qualitative research, this, oh no, I've handed it away. There's a new book by Yin, Qualitative Research from Start to Finish. It was a 2011 edition, and Yin deals with qualitative research in a fairly quasi-positivist way. So the way that he describes going around it tends to be very palatable in management research. And it's actually easy to do. Now, data analysis. People think that using complex words and complex analysis impress people. In fact, people appreciate simple and practical analysis and what they can understand. And in fact, people actually consider big words if you don't want people to look too closely. So they use a really, really complex word, but somebody might just actually understand that word, okay? Some people think you only look at the analysis after you've collected data. No, you don't. Because if you don't know how you're going to analyze it, you may not be collecting the data and the evidence that you need to do that analysis. There are people, and strictly positivist guys would go, the new positivist would go around, quantitative analysis is so scientific. Not everything can be measured with numbers, and numbers are not really the most meaningful thing that you want to do. There's some quotes around that. And very importantly, numbers may not be more accurate. In fact, you can say there's this whole thing about 94.2% of all statistics are made up on the spot. And then we will have disagreements on, in fact, no, it's 94.5% or 3%.
3.
Okay. Is this more accurate? Just because I put it in numbers doesn't mean it's more accurate. So there's a lot of things that you have to understand about data analysis. A lot of students believe that data have its own meaning. I just put down the diagram and magically you look at the diagram and the understanding pops out in your brain just because you've seen the diagram. That's not true. You have to explain what's happening. If you don't have explanation, and typically building your logic argument ahead of time enables you to explain it. Some people think that by stating what's the limitation, I did not have a good response rate. So I don't have 99% accuracy, I have a 92% accuracy or 90% or 80% accuracy. That really doesn't weaken the whole process. It makes it more usable because now I know what are the limitations. This is an indication I need to go much deeper to be able to use it. And a lot of people think that if I put it in a computer, it's better. It's in fact not necessarily better. You need to know how much data you have, and you need to understand what you're doing. Just by taking that evidence and handing it over to a statistician and say, do the analysis, and thinking that something will pop up, if you don't know what it is, it's a bit of an issue. Okay, I think, what's the time now?
3 minutes to 5.
3 minutes to 5. I'm going to call a quarter of an hour break now, and then we'll carry on here in a quarter of an hour, because I think people are really moving around and my voice is disappearing. Okay. I'm going to quickly run through some of the work that you can do. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but it basically deals with what kind of analysis you're going to do. The first stuff that you're going to do, and you're going to do that in quantitative and in qualitative, deals with your descriptive statistics. Descriptive statistics really deals with being able to do some statistics, but it doesn't deal with your pre-requirement that it be a random sample. You want to know certain things about what you're measuring. The kind of things you want to know is about measures of central tendency, the dispersion, the distribution. But you have to be able to understand what it is that you want to do and why do you want to do it. It does not deal with things about generalization. The common kind of descriptive statistics are those kind of things. This is all under descriptive statistics. And in a number of cases, that's all that people do. This is not complex. This can be done in any environment, and you've got to be able to look at that. Okay. Inferential statistics is a higher order of statistics. In order to do inferential statistics, what you're doing is you're saying that based on the way that I've drawn my sample, I can say things about the whole, I can infer things about the whole population. And you can only test the hypothesis through the use of some forms of inferential statistics. Now, if you do not have, if you haven't done any form of random sampling, and if you don't have appropriate responses, you can't do inferential statistics. So if you start talking about what analysis you're going to do, are you going to go do these kind of things? Or are you going to do inferential statistics? So the moment that you go around and you tell me that you're going to test a hypothesis, but your research design is not quantitative, your research design does not deal with random populations, then I know that you're not going to be able to do that. So you tell me something about the analysis, then I can see whether your design actually supports that form of analysis. So I don't want to see, I'm going to use SPSS. Are you going to use regression analysis? Are you going to use factor analysis? Are you going to do cluster analysis? What exactly is it that you're going to do? And can I then go back to see that your research design will enable you to do that? At this point, we're not really looking at it in depth to see if your instruments will enable it. We're just trying to see if there's congruence with your research design. Okay, when you do, and where's my friend that asked me the qualitative things? When you do qualitative analysis, typically you're doing pattern matching, you're looking at explanation building, rival explanations, and logic models. The moment you want to say do causal analysis quantitatively, you've got to build really in-depth logic models. Now, in order to do any one of this analysis, I'm not going to go through them in too much detail now. I'm just going to skip through them. You take this damn thing, you pop it into Wikipedia, and you look at what this is. You can use a number of other textbooks as well. But don't go around trying to tell me that you're going to do cluster analysis or regression analysis and your design does not enable you to do that. There are some underlying things that your design must have in order to do certain analysis. And your data collection has to have certain patterns to make certain analysis possible. If I do qualitative analysis, for example, one of the things I want to do is I want to reduce the meaning. I've got interviews of documents are 5 hours long. I just want to say, what is it that really, what does it mean? I go through that. I basically say, oh, here they were moaning about the current context. Here they were exploring alternatives. Here they were actually breaking it down. So what I see there, people explore it, but nobody really looks into implementation it. I'm reducing the meaning of long work. I can do at meaning condensation. I want to look at all this, and I'm analyzing certain key words so that I have a meaningful unit. I can say there, okay, this is what it means, condensated. I'll give you a condensed version. Categorization. I start doing content analysis, looking at how many times certain things got mentioned. Narrative structuring. I'm going through there and I'm going to say, what was the actual story that somebody told? I'm trying to put these things into order, and I'm trying to see what story they're telling. I can also be looking at something around hermeneutic interpretations. Now, one of the more entertaining documents that I've read in a long time was a book on the Great Gatsby, and was actually looking at the meaning, hermeneutic interpretations on the Great Gatsby. So they had a feminist perspective. They told the Great Gatsby and they analyzed it from a feminist perspective. They analyzed a psychoanalysis perspective on the Great Gatsby. They gave us a whole story from a Marxist point. They gave a gay perspective. And every time you read this perspective and you look at the original document, you would, huh? Because that meaning requires you to look from a pre-existing paradigm, a pre-existing understanding of truth. What is truth as opposed to really now what is meaning? Knowledge. So it could be long, it could be short. Now if you're going to go that way, it's very, very unlikely that you're going to do this in management research. So ad hoc, you can look at patterns. You can look at themes. You can look at plausibility. You can try and generate plausible explanations. You can cluster. You can apply metaphors. You can count. You can compare and contrast. You can partition variables. There's a heck of a lot of forms of data analysis that you can do qualitatively. And you need to be able to tell us what you are going to do. Content analysis is one. Actually looking at discourse analysis is another one. There's a whole lot that you can do, but you've got to tell us what it is. The moment you want to do a hypothesis testing, if you have stated hypothesis and you want to fail to disprove your hypothesis, you have to be able to do inferential statistics. So even if you state a hypothesis and you state that I want to test this hypothesis, please make dead sure that you involve random sampling, that you have enough, big enough size, sufficient response rate, understand your population, all of those things. All of those things.
Sorry, Ria, in which presentation did you talk about the population and how to select your sample?
I'm going to go through that quickly, but I'm not going to go through that in so much detail now. So the moment you want to do data analysis quantitatively, you want to organize your data. You've got all of the data. You've got to organize it. You've got to capture it. You have to start describing the sort of basic descriptive statistics around it. You want to do calculations, you want to interpret those, the information, and you want to present the data. So it's very important when you look at what you finally want to put together in the data, what you want to put in your analysis chapter 5, that you get all the evidence. If you want to display the differences between young people and old people, and you don't have the age groupings, you can't do it. What is it that you want to do around that? Then you draw your conclusion, present the results. A data analysis plan has got quite a lot to do. We don't expect you to do a detailed data analysis plan, but when you're really dealing with it, it's important that you tell me about what analysis technique you're going to use. I don't care if it's SPSS. I don't care if it's any of those packages. I don't care if it's Excel. I don't care if you do it manually. I care that you tell me cluster analysis, factor analysis, regression analysis. What is it you're going to do with it? Typically, if you start looking at what calculation you want to do, and this is now very much from your descriptive statistics, it depends on what question you want to ask. Are you going to determine the mean, the median, or the mode? The mean you would use if you want to look at the average number. The middle value from a median, and the one that appears most from a mode. So if you look at the descriptions, there are some people that say totally 5 in a scale, 5, and a lot of people that say 1 and 2. What on earth does it help you to determine the mean or the median? You really want to know which one appears the most. Okay. So you've got to understand what it is going to be that you're going to, what it is that you want to answer. So when you're looking at that analysis, and I'm not going to go into that too much detail, when you're looking at your analysis, you need to tell us what analysis are you going to commit. In order to know that, get hold of your textbook, get going, and for your specific design, look at it whether you're going to do qualitative or quantitative and what form of analysis you should be using. Typically, certain questions imply certain analysis. What are you going to do? Your choice. I'm not going to tell you. I can't tell you because everyone is so different. But you have to be able to tell us what you're going to do. Now, one of the things about your research, and this you've got to deal with explicitly, is how are you going to make sure that what you're going to do is quality research. There are 3 guards in research, and it's really quite serious. And no matter what your religious affiliation is in research, whether you're qualitative, quantitative, whatever thing, your paradigm, you have to give some level of thought to it. Now, the traditionalist quantitative positivist terminology would be around validity, reliability, and generalizability. Sometimes you use the word transferability, but traditionally, strictly positivist, it would be this as external validity. Those things. However, if you start looking at your more I don't even know what versions you want to use, but going towards the other side, you look at interpretivist, quality. There's another term that's used, and that term is called trustworthiness. Now, when Gupta did that work, it's seen as a serious challenge. One of the problems about management science is that people tend to prefer you to use the more traditional quasi-positivist terms. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explore both of those. But you want to know, and you want to explicitly state in your design, even in the short form of your design, how you are going to deal with the quality of your research. So fundamentally, if I use the term reliability, I imply that I will always get the same kind of result. If I'm talking about validity, I sort of imply that I'm measuring the right thing. I'm measuring it accurately, I'm measuring the right thing. And if my finding is both valid and reliable, bullseye. And that is just a feeling of what I mean with those words. They are very, very precise definitions. Okay. If I look at the quantitative paradigm, And I want to look at the term reliability, meaning how closely together these answers come. I can look at the reliability of my study, or I can look at the reliability of a measurement of the single instrument. Now, if I triangulate, I can say that I am triangulating to include the reliability of my study by using multiple measurements. But I also, in the rest, I can do different forms of triangulation. If I look at my measurements, I can improve the reliability of my measurements by doing inter-rater observer. So more than one person, and I check at whether the actual inter-rater consistency is there. Is it reliability? Do people see exactly the same thing all the time? Or I can start by looking at my measurements questionnaire. So if I do observation, I have a very detailed schedule and I do certain observations. And in fact, there's a very beautiful little observation schedule here where I'm talking about, where is it? Observations. Okay. On day that, how many do I see? It's a schedule here, and I record them, and I have quantitative data that I can analyze quantitatively. In order to do that, I just don't want one person to do that. I can improve the reliability by saying, okay, 3 of you, and we're going to watch it, and we're all going to code it. And then we're looking at all 3 of you see the same thing. And if we all 3 see the same thing, then we know that our observations are reliable. Okay. If I'm looking at my instrument and I look at it, I can see, okay, where this question is, I do it, and I test it again, and every time it measures the same thing. So it's reliable. Or I can look, is there internal consistency in that instrument's measurements? And that I can do either by split halves or by using Cronbach's alpha. The only reason I use Cronbach's alpha is around the reliability of a single instrument. Okay. Test retest tells me, do it. Similar scores where I do it next. Internal consistency, split half tell me, I measure 1, 2, 1, 3, 5, etc. And I measure 2, 4, 6. And actually it yields a similar score. That means that the items that are measuring the same thing all measuring the same thing. Cronbach's alpha is now not looking at one half to another half. It is trying to see at a high level whether all the items measures the same construct. So if I have a high Cronbach's alpha, it tells me that all the instruments that I have, items that I have in my instrument, measure the same construct. My big issue is here that a high Cronbach alpha tells me it's great, but if I go around, every time I add another item onto my list, my Cronbach's alpha gets higher. So I get here, I can put the instrument together with 100 items. It's perfectly reliable, but you can't really use it. So you have to have a trade-off between what you can exercise and what's a Cronbach alpha. So just because there are hundreds of them, you can have a great reliability of Cronbach alpha, and those things don't measure the same construct. Or you can have something that precisely measures the construct, fairly low Cronbach alpha, but it's only 5 items. So understanding and interpreting around a Cronbach alpha is very important. You can't just go, oops, I've got this figure perfect. It's nearly 1. Wow. Okay. So when I look at instrument reliability, there's 2 things I can do. Test, retest. Same instrument on 2 occasions. I can also look at internal consistency. In the same instrument, do all of the parts of it say the same thing? Or I can look at equivalent forms. I want to be able to say, and this typically you do when you test something with a questionnaire. This is one questionnaire, And that's the other questionnaire. Do I have reliable results if I use either? So I use this form and I use this form. Do they both different forms give me the same reliable answer? Validity is slightly different. And this is once again quantitative. So if you look at quantitative, your measurement must be valid. Are you actually aiming and are you measuring what you think you're measuring? The concept that you think you're measuring. And your research design is very important because you want to be able to make sure that you are really observing the relationships that you thought you were observing, or are you observing something else? A lot of validity deals with the operationalization, how you're actually going to do that. Now, in quantitative research, we typically say we know about our reliability. Our validity is a bit of an issue because we must make absolutely sure that these instruments are valid. And one of the reasons we deal with validity is by using a known instrument, a pre-tested instrument that has had its validity. We also increase our validity by making absolutely sure that the items that we are measuring have got solid theoretical grounding. So we have links between that item that we're observing, that it is actually indication of a certain construct or certain concept that we're trying to deal. So quantitatively, you could look at your measurements. Once again, you could look at its phase validity, predictive validity, concurrent or construct validity. We'll deal with it now. Or you're looking overall. Is my research internally valid? It's actually looking, or external validity. And external validity is my generalizability. So have I sampled randomly so I can say something about the whole population, or do I have an ecological sample? So basically, if we go through this, phase validity, roughly interpreted, people get sick. Does it look okay? Is this really the right thing that I'm measuring? Concurrent, does it actually agree with other measures? If I measure somebody's happiness with this way, does it actually agree with other happiness measurements that look slightly different? So is my validity concurrent? Is it predictive? If I say I want to measure loyalty, customer loyalty, and my instrument indicates high loyalty, does it actually predict that people will stay loyal if I follow it? That is predictive loyalty. And does it capture construct? Does it actually capture the whole concept? So if I want to say, I'm going to measure customer loyalty, what is it that I'm going to measure? I can't put a temperature measurement in and say, customer is loyal. I'm going to look at certain aspects, and I'm going to have certain items that I test, and I hope that by answering that, I measure loyalty. So hoping that I answer it means I'm either going to use a very well-designed instrument that has been proven to measure it, or I'm going to put my own instruments together. That instrument, I will make sure that if I ask them this question, there's a good theoretical and preferably about 10 studies that show that these things are linked, and I use those things. But I can measure loyalty, but my instruments only look at certain bits of the loyalty. I'm not actually looking at the whole construct. There's certain key instruments of loyalty that are missing because I'm not looking at that. So validity looks at all of these issues. So if you do a quantitative study, you have to talk about what you're going to do improve your validity. You've got to tell me what you're going to do to improve your reliability. From a validity perspective, there are basically 3 different types of validity things that can go around. And these things are really can be seen qualitatively or quantitatively. Your type 1 error. You're saying that something is true, or you approve, you agree with the hypothesis when it's not. That's a validity 1 type. So you're saying something is happening, you think you've measured something, but that is not valid. Type 1 error. Okay? Or type 2 error is I'm saying it's not true, but actually it is true. And a type 3 error, ask the wrong question. Okay? So all 3 of these are possibly validity issues. And you have to be absolutely sure that you have gone the right way to look at those validity issues. Your sources of invalidity could be because your theory, the theoretical assumptions that you went onto, is not valid, was incorrect. So the things that I looked for as indicators were not the right indicators. It could also be that what I measure is not actually what I think I should be measuring. I think I'm measuring something, but the way that I've phrased my questions mean that I'm measuring something totally different. I think I'm measuring loyalty, but what I'm measuring is actually people's intent to repurchase. And that may not actually be the same thing as loyalty. And then there are many, many interpretations. What does a specific measurement mean? Does it indicate something or something else? And all of those cases, your literature in quantitative research, your literature evidence, your evidence that prove that what you are measuring is what you're intending to measure is incredibly important. So the stronger your literature, the stronger your analysis of the current body of knowledge, the more likely you're going to be doing valid work. So overall, in quantitative work, you are eliminating these threats by the way you design your instruments, by the way you're sampling. Okay. So a lot of quantitative work is in the initial design. In qualitative work, you can't always do that. So in qualitative work, prior elimination is not that easy. It's more inductive. You're going to do understanding and not necessarily trying to generalize. And you can't really go around random sampling. But you still have to deal with these threats. You can use those words, we've discussed them, but fundamentally your rigor is in your process. So when you do qualitative work, you have to clearly put together whether you'd call it protocols, whether you call them schedules. You've got to clearly tell us what you're going to do and how are you going to go about it. Okay. So, and this is Yin, this is 2009 book. So what you can see in Yin's book, and that's why possibly in management studies that's a very good one, he used the traditional positivist terminology. He's saying that external validity, you're going to deal with theory in single case studies, use replication, not logic in multiple. But the term you can use for this is also my transferability. Okay. Reliability is by using case study protocols. I say exactly what I'm going to do so that anybody else that do it will get the same thing. I'm putting together my database. I am not only saying I've done this case study, I do a fairly detailed summary of what this case is about. And if you're going to do that, nouns and nouns. Okay? Internal validity, I'm checking for pattern matching. Now, in qualitative study, we typically say something around validity is very easy. The issue here is to deal with reliability. Because qualitative studies tend to be very valid because you know exactly what you're measuring. And quantitative studies tend to be more reliable. Are you looking at your construct validity, internal validity, and external validity? So in order to deal with the construct validity, that means that I'm measuring all of the aspects. We use multiple sources of evidence. We use a chain of evidence, and we draw up a case study report when we do case study research, or some descriptive field notes, something around that. The way that I'm looking at a qualitative research, Lincoln and Gupta's work talks about the whole issue of trustworthiness. Now, if you're looking at trustworthiness, there are 4 alternate sets that you use. You're using the term credibility, you're using the term dependability, you're using the term transferability and confirmability. Now, management research, you would typically use the terms reliability, validity, and transferability. That keeps people happy. You can go around using this other terminology, but you have to be incredibly certain that in your area of research, these are acceptable. They are perfectly usable. There's nothing wrong with them. But if it's not accepted in your field of study, people will make nasty noises and your whole thing would be challenged. Okay. Credibility refers to accuracy. See those reliability kind of words here? It must be recognized. And it's enhanced by, not proven by, improved, enhanced by prolonged time in the field. Repeatedly observing, looking over and over, using different data sources, methods, data type, all these triangulation things, and conducting member checks, having other people also looking at it, so you increase the reliability type things. So typically, if you look at credibility issues, it tends to sort of go with credibility. Those are the strategies. I must make sure that whatever I come with the explanation, there's not another explanation, all of these kind of things. Dependability means that it's going to happen over time conditions. So if it happens in this environment, it will happen in another environment. So you really want to see if another researcher, these are still very close to some issues about reliability, isn't it? It's looking if another one will make the same conclusion. So you have to put together an audit trail. And if you do qualitative research, typically you use Atlas TI, and you would put together all your evidence and show how you've done your theme analysis. Your evidence would be the trial of how you've gone together, would be there, it would be published in a CD, and it would be behind you. Dependability audits could be done. You've got to really, really describe your research method so that somebody else can follow it. You do stepwise replication. I do this again to check. Triangulation. You do peer examination, and you code, recode. I code it, somebody else code it. We just check that it happens all the same. Around transferability, it talks about the generalizability. Okay. So I'm not sampling randomly. But I want to say that I can transfer what I found here into other situations. So you must have sufficient detail so that people will believe you. So when you describe, if you use a single case study, you've got to describe why this is typical, why this is compelling, why this is emergent, any one of those things. And if you can't transfer, it's seen as a level of weakness in qualitative work. Now the issue is, if you're going for a fully phenomenological approach, you don't care about transferability because that's not the issue. So when I talk about qualitative methods here, I'm talking to qualitative methods as perceived from a management, from the more typical traditional perspectives. Your selection. How do I select individuals? Use a nominated sample, demographic knowledge, all kinds of things around that. Dense description being one of them. Confirmability, would somebody else actually say that this is valid? And it really deals with, it's the same kind of meaning here. What you're really looking there is conformability audit, you're doing triangulation and reflexivity. Now assignment 5, which some of you will be doing, some of you will not be doing, really requires you to do very superficial kind of work and analyze what your design is about. You don't have to pull that together. But what it really tells you is just put down, if you do this assignment, your problem, your question, and if you have a hypothesis, so we can look at congruence. Is it the same thing? How are you going to structure your question? In other words, what's your objectives? What's your literature objectives? What's your empirical objectives? And then you've got to tell me how you're going to do about it philosophical, and what's your methodology. Now, if you have a multiple methodology, if you have a mixed methodology, you would typically put the diagram here. How are you going to go about it so that we can see the flow between the elements? And then what you go through is you look at your empirical objectives. And typically, if you have more than one empirical objectives, you may be going around them differently. Or if you want to triangulate about empirical objective, you may have 3 different things that you want to triangulate. So in order to be clear, tell me per objective, what's your objective there? How are you going to go about it? Is it going to be the same? What technique are you going to use? Data collection. What's your population? How are you going to sample? How are you going to collect? And how are you going to address issues of validity and reliability? Be clear about those.